The courtroom smelled of polished wood and quiet judgment. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, landing unevenly across the worn benches where ordinary people waited to have their lives decided in minutes. Alicia Monroe stood at the center, her wrists uncuffed but her dignity already bruised. She wore a simple gray dress, slightly faded, pressed carefully the night before. Her natural hair was pulled back neatly, a choice made not for style, but for survival. She could feel the stares. Some curious. Some dismissive. Some already convinced she was guilty. Officer Daniel Reeves stood behind her, his posture rigid, his badge catching the light. To him, Alicia was not a person. She was a file number. A nuisance dragged in from a neighborhood people only mentioned when something went wrong. "Defendant, keep your eyes forward," Reeves snapped. Alicia swallowed. Her palms were damp, her heart pounding, but her chin stayed lifted. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft but firm. "Never bow your head to cruelty. That's how it wins." Across the room, Prosecutor Victor Lang adjusted his tailored suit and smiled faintly. The kind of smile that came from knowing the system had been built to protect him. He hadn't read Alicia's file with interest. He didn't need to. Cases like this ended the same way. They always did. Judge Eleanor Whitmore had not yet entered, but her elevated seat loomed over the courtroom like a throne. Alicia glanced at it briefly, then looked away. That seat represented power she had never known, a world where people spoke and others suffered the consequences. Court Security Chief Thomas Reed nodded toward the officers. "Let's keep this moving." Officer Mark Holloway shifted uncomfortably beside Reeves. He avoided Alicia's eyes. He had joined the force to protect people, or at least that's what he told himself. Somewhere along the way, protecting the badge had become more important than protecting the truth. As Alicia took a small step forward, her foot brushed the edge of the defense table. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Reeves leaned in close, his voice low and sharp. "Watch yourself." "I am," Alicia said quietly. The words barely left her mouth before it happened. A sharp slap cracked through the courtroom. The sound froze everything. Alicia staggered, her head snapping to the side. For a moment, the world blurred. A metallic taste filled her mouth. She did not scream. She did not fall. She stood there, stunned, her cheek burning, her eyes wide not with fear, but disbelief. Naomi Carter, the court clerk, gasped. Her fingers tightened around the papers she was holding. This wasn't procedure. This wasn't law. This was cruelty, raw and unfiltered. What was that? Naomi whispered to herself. Reeves lowered his hand slowly, unapologetic. "Contempt," he said flatly. She mouthed off. Alicia turned her face back toward him. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "I didn't say anything wrong." "Silence," Thomas Reed barked. "You're not here to argue." Inside Alicia's chest, something cracked open, not pain, but clarity. All her life, she had been told to endure. To stay quiet. To survive. But as she stood there, humiliated in front of strangers, she felt something else rise up. Resolve. Her thoughts drifted to her younger brother, Caleb, working double shifts at a warehouse to keep the lights on. To her mother, Ruth, who had cleaned offices at night and taught her daughter the difference between respect and submission. This is what they think of us, Alicia thought. This is how they decide who matters. The courtroom doors opened. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered, her robe flowing, her expression unreadable. The room stood. Alicia's cheek still throbbed, but she straightened anyway. "Be seated," the judge said. Her eyes moved across the room, pausing briefly on Alicia. Just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Something passed through Judge Whitmore's gaze. Recognition. Curiosity. Regret. Victor Lang cleared his throat. Your Honor, the defendant has been disruptive. Judge Whitmore raised a hand. I will decide what is disruptive. The room fell silent. Alicia met the judge's eyes again. This time, she did not look away. And for reasons Alicia did not yet understand, Judge Whitmore felt a strange tightening in her chest, as if the past had just walked back into the room uninvited. The balance of power had not shifted yet. But it had begun to tremble. The courtroom settled into an uneasy stillness after the slap, like a wound left open in plain sight. Judge Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her glasses, her eyes fixed on the file before her, though she wasn't truly reading it. The echo of that sound still rang in her ears. She had heard many things in this room over the years, lies, pleas, confessions, but violence from an officer before proceedings had even begun struck something deeper. Officer Reeves, Judge Whitmore said evenly, is there a reason the defendant appears injured? Reeves stiffened. Your Honor, the defendant was being non-compliant. Alicia felt her jaw tighten. Non-compliant. That word had followed her since childhood, used whenever she dared to ask why. Judge Whitmore looked up slowly. Her gaze moved from Reeves' clenched fist to Alicia's reddened cheek. Ms. Monroe, she said, her voice softer now, did you resist arrest? Alicia hesitated. Every instinct told her to be careful. To choose silence. But something about the judge's eyes, not kind, not cruel, but searching, made her speak. No, Your Honor, Alicia said. I asked why I was being charged. Victor Lang let out a quiet chuckle. With all due respect, Your Honor, the defendant has a history of disorderly behavior. Alicia's hands curled into fists. A history, she thought. A single protest ticket from years ago, twisted into a pattern. Judge Whitmore tapped her pen against the bench. History is context, Mr. Lang, not a verdict. Naomi Carter felt a shiver run down her spine. In the 2 years she had worked in this courtroom, she had never heard Judge Whitmore challenge the prosecution so early. Officer Mark Holloway swallowed hard. He remembered the arrest. He remembered Alicia asking questions, calmly. He also remembered Reeves losing his temper. Guilt pressed heavy against his ribs. The judge leaned back slightly. State the charge. Victor Lang straightened. Ms. Alicia Monroe is charged with assaulting a police officer during a routine stop. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Alicia's breath caught. That's not true, she said before she could stop herself. Thomas Reed stepped forward. Defendant will remain silent unless addressed. Judge Whitmore raised a hand again. I addressed her. Reed stopped. Alicia looked up, surprised. Judge Whitmore's voice lowered. Ms. Monroe, tell me what happened. Slowly. Alicia closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she wasn't in the courtroom anymore. She was standing beside her brother's broken-down car, police lights flashing, her heart already racing because she knew how these moments ended. I was walking home, Alicia began. They stopped me. Asked for ID. I asked why. One of them got angry. I never touched anyone. Her voice wavered at the end, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Years of explaining herself boiled beneath every word. Judge Whitmore listened, truly listened. Each sentence felt uncomfortably familiar. Too familiar. Her mind drifted backward, decades ago, to a young law student standing in a different courtroom, watching her own mother be dismissed, silenced, treated as small. The memory tightened her chest. Victor Lang interrupted. Your Honor, with respect, we cannot allow emotional storytelling to distract from. Enough, Judge Whitmore said sharply. The room froze. Naomi's pen hovered in midair. She had never heard that tone before. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. I want to see the body cam footage. Reeves' eyes flickered. Just for a second. There was a malfunction, he said quickly. Silence followed. Alicia felt her heart begin to pound harder. She didn't know why, but something told her this mattered. A malfunction, Judge Whitmore repeated slowly. How convenient. Officer Holloway shifted. His mouth opened, then closed again. Sweat formed at his hairline. Judge Whitmore noticed. Holloway, she said, calling him by name. You were present? Yes, Your Honor. Did the defendant assault anyone? Time stretched. Holloway looked at Reeves. Then at Alicia. Then down at the floor. No, he said quietly. She didn't. The word landed like a dropped gavel. Victor Lang stood abruptly. Your Honor. I will remind you, Judge Whitmore said coldly, that perjury in my courtroom carries consequences. Alicia's eyes widened. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Not for someone like her. Judge Whitmore's gaze returned to Alicia, softer now, heavier. Ms. Monroe, she said, do you know why this court exists? Alicia shook her head. So that power answers to truth, the judge said. Not the other way around. For the first time since the slap, Alicia felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. But beneath the judge's calm exterior, a decision was forming, one that would soon shock everyone in the room. Because Judge Eleanor Whitmore had recognized Alicia for a reason. And the truth about who Alicia really was, and why she was here, was about to turn the courtroom upside down. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of order. It felt like a battlefield where truth and power were circling each other, waiting for one wrong move. Judge Eleanor Whitmore sat upright, her hands folded, her expression controlled, too controlled. Inside her, memories were colliding with the present. Alicia Monroe stood silently now, her pulse loud in her ears. She could feel something shifting, but she didn't yet understand what. All she knew was that for the first time, the people who usually spoke over her were hesitating. Judge Whitmore turned her attention to the court clerk. Ms. Carter, seal the record temporarily. Naomi Carter blinked. Your Honor. Now. Naomi obeyed, her fingers trembling slightly as she followed the command. The gallery murmured. Temporary sealing was rare. It meant whatever came next was not meant for casual ears. Victor Lang leaned forward, his voice tight. Your Honor, I must object. This is highly irregular. Judge Whitmore's gaze snapped toward him. So was striking a defendant in my courtroom. Lang fell silent. Judge Whitmore stood. The sound of her chair sliding back echoed louder than the slap had earlier. Judges did not stand during routine hearings. Authority flowed downward from the bench. Everyone knew that. Alicia's breath caught as Judge Whitmore slowly descended the steps from her elevated seat. Thomas Reed moved instinctively. Your Honor, protocol. Sit down, Mr. Reed, Judge Whitmore said without looking at him. He froze. Then sat. Judge Whitmore stopped just a few feet from Alicia. Up close, Alicia noticed the fine lines around the judge's eyes, the weight they carried. This was not the face of a woman untouched by struggle. You have your mother's eyes, Judge Whitmore said quietly. Alicia stiffened. You knew my mother. The room seemed to lose oxygen. Officer Reeves frowned. Your Honor, what is the relevance? Be quiet, Judge Whitmore said sharply. She took a breath, steadying herself. Ruth Monroe stood in this courthouse 27 years ago. She was ignored. Dismissed. Spoken over. Just like you. Alicia's heart pounded violently. Her mother had died believing the system had failed her completely. She was the smartest woman in the room, Judge Whitmore continued, her voice thickening. And no one listened. Naomi Carter felt tears sting her eyes. This was no longer just a case. This was a reckoning. Victor Lang shook his head. Your Honor, personal history cannot influence judicial. It already has, Judge Whitmore said. 4 decades. Just not in her favor. Judge Whitmore turned back toward the bench, then stopped. "Officer Reeves," she said, "approach." Reeves hesitated. He had never been spoken to like this by a judge. He walked forward stiffly. "Did you know," Judge Whitmore asked, "that Ms. Alicia Monroe is a licensed attorney?" The courtroom erupted. "What?" Lang shouted. "That's impossible," Reed said under his breath. Alicia's eyes widened in shock. "What?" Judge Whitmore finally looked at her fully. "You didn't know," she said softly. "They didn't tell you." Alicia's mind raced. She remembered the scholarship interview years ago. The sealed internship. The silence afterward. Judge Whitmore raised her voice. "Ms. Monroe passed the bar 3 months ago. Her name was deliberately delayed in public records due to an internal ethics investigation she was assisting with." Victor Lang's face drained of color. "This court," Judge Whitmore continued, "is overseeing a federal integrity review. Ms. Monroe was placed into this system intentionally. To see how it treats those it believes are powerless." The room was dead silent. Officer Holloway's knees felt weak. Alicia whispered, "This was a test." Judge Whitmore nodded once. "And many people failed." She turned sharply toward Thomas Reed. "Remove Officers Reeves and Holloway from the courtroom." Reeves exploded. "You can't do this." Judge Whitmore's voice dropped, deadly calm. "I can. And I will." She stepped back toward the bench, then stopped again. "In light of what has occurred," she said, "I am recusing myself." Gasps filled the room. "And per emergency judicial protocol," she continued, looking directly at Alicia, "the presiding authority will be transferred to the highest-ranked certified officer of the court present." She paused. "That officer is Ms. Alicia Monroe." Alicia froze. The judge's seat loomed behind her now. The same seat she had glanced at earlier, believing it belonged to a world she could never touch. Seconds later, the unthinkable happened. Judge Whitmore gestured toward the bench. "Ms. Monroe," she said, "take the seat." The courtroom had fallen into a silence so deep it felt unnatural, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Alicia Monroe stood frozen at the base of the bench, her mind struggling to catch up with reality. Moments ago, she had been a defendant. Now, every eye in the room was on her as a figure of authority. "I can't," Alicia whispered, her voice barely audible. Judge Eleanor Whitmore met her gaze. "You can," she said gently. "And you must." Alicia's legs felt heavy as she climbed the steps. Each one echoed with memories: nights studying under flickering lights, rejection letters, her mother's exhaustion, her brother's quiet sacrifices. The bench that once symbolized everything closed off to her now stood within reach. She sat. The chair was firmer than she expected. Higher. From here, the room looked different. Smaller. Exposed. Thomas Reed shifted uncomfortably. "This is unprecedented." "So was what happened to her," Alicia said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. Victor Lang stood slowly, his confidence fractured. "Ms. Monroe, with respect, this proceeding is invalid." Alicia leaned forward slightly. "Respect," she repeated, "is not selective." Lang opened his mouth, then closed it. Alicia took a breath. "Ms. Carter," she said, turning to Naomi. Naomi straightened instinctively. "Yes, Your Honor." The title sent a shiver through Alicia. "Unseal the body cam records," Alicia said. Naomi hesitated. "They were listed as corrupted." "Run them anyway." Naomi typed. The screen flickered. Then video appeared. The footage played silently at first. Alicia watched herself on the screen, calm, standing beside her brother's car. Reeves' voice crackled through the speakers, aggressive, escalating. The moment he shoved her. The moment he lied. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Victor Lang's face collapsed. This evidence was not disclosed. That is correct, Alicia said. Which constitutes prosecutorial misconduct. Judge Whitmore closed her eyes briefly. Alicia's gaze hardened. Officer Reeves, you are under arrest for assault, falsifying reports, and contempt of court. Reeves shouted as security moved in. This is a setup. Alicia didn't flinch. No, she said quietly. This is accountability. She turned to Officer Holloway. You told the truth. That matters. Holloway nodded, tears welling in his eyes. Alicia's chest tightened as she addressed the room. My mother once stood where I stood. She was ignored. I was tested. And today, this court chooses who it will be. She looked directly at Victor Lang. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Lang sank back into his seat. Judge Whitmore stood slowly. For the first time, she bowed her head, not in authority, but in respect. Alicia felt the weight of the moment settle over her. Power, she realized, wasn't about dominance. It was about responsibility. And the room finally understood. The courtroom did not erupt in applause. It didn't need to. The silence carried more weight than noise ever could. Alicia Monroe sat still in the judge's seat, her hands resting calmly on the bench, feeling the full gravity of what had just occurred. Authority, she realized, wasn't loud. It was steady. Judge Eleanor Whitmore stepped forward. The emergency authority will conclude here, she said. Ms. Monroe will submit her findings to the federal panel. Alicia nodded. I will. As officers escorted Daniel Reeves out, his anger dissolved into fear. He looked back once, not at the judge, but at Alicia, the woman he had believed was powerless. The realization broke something inside him. Victor Lang gathered his papers with shaking hands. His career, built on shortcuts and selective truth, had collapsed in a single morning. He avoided Alicia's eyes as he left. The gallery slowly emptied. Ordinary people walked out carrying something unfamiliar, the belief that justice could change. Naomi Carter lingered. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? Alicia asked. For showing me why I came here in the first place. Alicia smiled faintly. Later that evening, Alicia stood alone in the empty courtroom. Sunlight had faded, replaced by soft amber lamps. She ran her fingers along the bench, no longer as a symbol of distance, but of duty. She whispered, "You should have been heard, Mama." In her mind, Ruth Monroe smiled back. Outside, Caleb waited. When he saw his sister, he pulled her into a tight embrace. "You did it," he said. "We did," Alicia replied. Weeks later, reforms followed. Policies changed. Records reopened. Names once buried were spoken aloud. Alicia returned to the courtroom, not as a test, not as a defendant, but as a judge. And every time she took her seat, she remembered the slap. Not with anger, but as a reminder. Power must always answer to truth.